Okay, away we go. Ready to begin?
Yep.
Yeah. Hey, yeah. Thanks everyone. Thanks for joining this edition of the PCI Dream Team. Two quick housekeeping items. Any questions you have, and please feel free to ask them. Put those in the Q&A column, the Q&A tab. Don't put it in the chat. And also, we're gonna there will be 3 copies of our book given away randomly at the end, so you'll be notified afterwards. So once again, thanks for joining. My name is Ben Rothke. I'll introduce myself, and then the other gentleman will do the same. So I'm a senior information security manager based in New York City with Tapad. Been in security, for many years. And this is I forgot which number webinar this is for us, but this one's unique. We're celebrating our book that came out just a few weeks ago, the definitive guide to PCI DSS version 4, documentation, compliance, and management, from A Press. So it's selling like hotcakes, but fortunately there's copies available on Amazon, and as I said, 3 lucky attendees will get a copy. So as I said, I've got Coop, David Mundhenk, and Jeff, and so we'll do some quick intros, and then we'll talk about some pressing PCI things, and then we'll go to the Q&A, and hopefully we'll cover all of that in an hour. So Coop, quick intro for the 2 people in the United States who don't know who you are.
Okay, thanks. With that, I'm done. Just Art Cooper, been involved in PCI since pretty much day one, and still enjoy it. Still like being a QSA. Still like arguing with Jeff, David, and Ben about the same stuff, because it just keeps coming back around. So that's why I love working with these gentlemen, and it has given me so much pleasure over the years to work with all 3 of them, and especially to work getting that book out. It was just a great experience, or has been a great and continues to be a great experience. So hopefully we can give you a little information today that helps you. If it doesn't, then I apologize, but hang around with us anyway.
David.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Mundhenk. I'm a principal security consultant with eDelta Consulting, a firm that's based in New York City, believe it or not. And I've been with them about 6 months now. Before that, I worked for for Herjavec Group for about 6 years, and specialized mostly in GRC stuff, but obviously in the PCI space. Before that, I worked for Coalfire. I was on their application validation team, where we did a lot of application security testing, especially as it related at the time to the PCI DSS security standard, and did a lot of fun stuff while there. And that's where I kind of cut my teeth on application security, if you will. And then before that, I was with IBM for 7 years, and I ran a QSA practice. Thanks for joining, and thanks to TrustedSec, and also thanks to these other 3 gentlemen for yet another opportunity to talk about the vagaries and the extensities of the PCI DSS, especially version 4.
Jeff.
You ready for me now, Ben?
Okay.
I am
the doctor will see you now.
yeah. I am Jeff Hall, otherwise known as the PCI Guru, because I write that blog. Oh God, thanks, Coop. Although I haven't been as diligent as I should be with it lately. I need to get some stuff out, but I've been rather preoccupied with the book and other stuff. So, but glad to be here with everyone again and take your questions and talk about things. Which, can I start my rant now, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it was, I'm sure, it'll come up in the Q&A, but one of the oldest questions was, VoIP. It's started with version 1, and people are still struggling with it. And I know you can speak.
Well, and
Yeah,
and
so
they're struggling with it because there's so few people that actually understand how voice over IP works. It's it's more than just networking. It actually works like the old private branch exchange boxes of old. And because of that, people just, they don't understand, and they don't understand the data flow of it. And as a result, they end up with solutions that are still in scope. And then people like Coop and myself and David and Ben show up and explain to people that, hey, your voice system is still in scope, because even though the operators can't hear what's being said or keyed through the DTMF, it's still flowing through your call manager, and that's a CDE. And so then you end up with, it's bad enough with just regular old-fashioned handsets, but nowadays, thanks to COVID, everybody went to soft phones. And now that soft phone and the PC it's connected to are also all in scope, because it connects to the call manager. And so it just, I've been on too many calls of late where people are accepting telephone orders, and what do you mean my phone system's in scope? Well, I've got an IVR. Well, good for you, but those tones are flowing over your phone system. Well, the operator can't hear them. Well, good for you. I mean, the phone system can still be hacked, and a hacker can listen to the DTMFs or the voice, and then they've got card numbers. Or worse yet, they've got card numbers in CVV. So, and then the famous refrain is, well, the other QSA, he never called him in scope.
That's my favorite answer.
Yep. That,
Why are you looking at this, Coop? Nobody else did.
Yep.
I mean, what about the fact also, it's, as they say, these calls are recorded for quality assurance. I mean, so they could be, anyone who's got admin access or supervisor access.
And my famous story about that was a large organization that had a masking system installed, and it worked great until somebody changed the script they were using, and all of a sudden the masking system no longer caught it because the script had changed, and the masking system was looking for it at 10 seconds into the call, for example, and now it wasn't occurring until 25 seconds into the call, and so the masking system didn't catch it at all.
Yeah.
So then they ended up with hundreds of thousands of phone calls with the cardholder data in there that they thought was no longer in there. So
if you had to give 3 key tips to doing VoIP call recording correctly, securely, and PCI compliantly, what would you tell people, merchants?
Well, understand how the phone system works first and foremost. That when you transfer a call to an IVR and you're allowed to bring it back, that call is still flowing through your call manager, and so that data is still there. Okay. If you're recording it, make sure the recordings are encrypted and you minimize who actually has access to those. There shouldn't be a ton of people. It should strictly be the QA people who are reviewing those calls and no one else. And lastly, if you're gonna buy a masking service, fine, but then outsource your call manager. Give it to Cisco, give it to Mitel, give it to a third party so it's not on your network, but understand that soft phones are going to connect to it, and those bring the PCs that are connected to into scope. So, oh, anonymous attendee scenario. Third party cloud hosted phone platform, call center agents working remote and running a soft phone on their company laptop. Is the laptop running the soft phone in scope? Yep, it definitely is.
Mhm.
If so, is the person's home network in scope as a connected system? If you've encrypted the connection, then the home network is not in scope. If you have not encrypted the connection between that laptop and everything else, then yes, their home Wi-Fi, their home router, it's all in scope.
Mhm. That's right. Now, granted, the scope can be limited, and it means perhaps a reduced set of requirements that are applicable, but it's in scope and it has to be considered. So that's the bottom line.
And that's the rub in all this is
Mhm.
people do not, most network people and even telephony people I've run into these days don't know how a phone system truly works.
Mhm.
And the other thing that gets missed is people don't realize that a call manager is a server. It's not a special device anymore. It's usually running a reduced Linux instruction set or something of that ilk. Worst case, it's running Windows. But that is a server, just like any other server. An IVR system is a server, just like any other server. So to say, well, it's because I've had people say this to me, well, it's the telephone system. Yeah, so what? It's a server.
So I have a couple of clients whose IVR system is from a PCI compliant service provider. However, it's completely built in the cloud, AWS, and it's also running on containers. They're container apps, all woven together to do that voodoo that they do so well. So that is also an architecture that I've run into as well. And as it relates to the call manager, a lot of times the call managers, they could be in a store, retail store, they could be in on-prem data center. A lot of times there's very little segmentation associated with that call manager because they want to make sure they can get to everybody's phone.
Mhm. Yep, that's true.
Yep.
Oh, there's a good question.
Here's the going. How do I
Ben, you need to
know?
take that one on about the QSA being competent.
How do I know the QSA is competent and not missing things like Coop said? I think the best thing overall is you get there's
Hire TrustedSec.
Okay. You like anything, you do your RFP and you get some numbers. Obviously, you're going to get lowball numbers, and also you want to speak to references, and you engage the QSAs, and you speak about their experience, talk to them about your problems, and they should be able to give you that level of confidence. But often a lot of these projects are sold just on a numbers basis alone, and the cheapest USA company often will be you'll save money in the short term, but in the long term it's going to be quite expensive. And sometimes as he says, good there's an old thing from the AAA. It says it doesn't cost to be a member of the AAA, it pays. It's cute, but it's also true is, finding a good QSA is a great investment. This is a firm that's also going to not just do an annual audit, they'll be there to give you real answers. So you could always find something cheaper, but when it comes to quality, spending a little more is going to be a worthwhile investment. And I've seen countless clients who just went with the lowball number and an order of magnitude more than the the numbers they save.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, it's like anything else. It's like getting your car fixed, right? So, getting a good mechanic, which they're a dime a dozen. I think it's the same with QSAs. I think that's one of the reasons why most of us that have been QSAing, if that's an actual verb, all of us who have been QSAing for as many years as the four of us have. I mean,
I guess if cash back in is the real world, that
yeah, there you go. I mean, I think what it is the relationships that get established are what's important. It's because you have a QSA that understands, and unfortunately, somebody just made a great comment about a good company matters, but a good QSA is the solution. Sometimes large size QSAs do not have good QSAs. That's true. I don't know that the size of the company matters, but that's true. That's a tough one. I don't think we could ever get that answered here today. But I'd like to take on one that was posted by a gentleman I know very well, a good fella, and it's about requirement 1161, because the salespeople are probably driving everybody nuts now with they're all selling their widgets to take care of these requirements, the new requirements that are going to come into play March 31st, 2025. About pay pages. First, there's the one, of course, about the scripting to make sure that you have an inventory of your scripts and that you don't have Bugs Bunny's pay page getting launched on your pay page. And then this one is sort of like FIM for a pay page, is kind of the way I look at it. In other words, you've got a payment web, you've got a payment website, you've got a payment page out there, and what you have to do is respond if something changes on that pay page. And so, this is a new one and it's a great one. Dave loves it because Dave's our web guy, and he's been wanting this for a long time, as have we all. As far as the discussion on how to meet this control, well, the jury's still out. I mean, there's a bunch of companies now that are putting out solutions that swear they're going to take care of this. It may well be true. I think what's going to happen is you're going to have something like, I forget the name of this software, but back in the old days.
Tripwire?
No, do you remember that HP stuff that we had that used to replay stuff and then it would verify that the website?
Oh, yeah. What was
You remember
it?
that stuff? It was great. Yeah. And what's sad is I was actually there as a contractor in Colorado Springs because it was the NetMetrics people here in Colorado Springs that had it. And I can't remember the name of the bloody tool. And it would go out and replay a website, look for all the expected responses.
Yeah.
It was a great tool. It
was
came
a
out
Mercury Interactive tool, that one?
It was like that. It was kind of
Yeah.
like that, but it was on a lower scale. And so I think what you're going to see is you're going to see tools like that are going to go out and read the pay page and look for the code and just make sure the code hasn't changed.
My question has always been, and I've never had a good answer from any web developers, isn't there a way to flag a page so that the scripts and everything else just avoid it?
I've asked that same question, and because I don't have the skills that pay the bills with web development, I don't think received a good answer either. I personally, I think it's like this. I mean, if you look at the code that goes into these payment pages, right? I mean, we don't have ASP stuff anymore. The old active server pages could actually be monitored even better than some of the stuff that they throw out now. But I think, I was going to say, Dave, go ahead and answer this because you're the guy that knows how to do FIM on pay pages.
Right. So, I've been evangelizing on this topic for quite some time now, and this basically relates to client-side web browser vulnerabilities. And the vulnerabilities can come from multiple sources. They could be, typically when application development teams do their Q&A process or their QA process for testing this stuff, all the testing, penetration, web or application penetration testing, application security testing, all that is focused on the server. But there's been very little visibility into the client-side web browser. And it has been that way for years, except for malware creators and social media. And social media has conquered this realm and controls it pretty much at will. Now, I've been working with a company called Feroot, F-E-R-O-O-T, and I've been working with them for about 4 years now, and I actually have published a couple of papers, co-published a couple of papers with them. They have a software as a service application suite, if you will, that sort of behaves as a person in the middle, if you will. It's like a headless browser, and they can intercept all of those scripts and all of those, HTML tag manager calls to Google and to Adobe and other third-party sources that can actually, the offending scripts aren't necessarily injecting that stuff into the session, but they are sharing that information with all these other third-party sources. They've also included software that essentially measures the telemetry of the user browser experience, supposedly for improving the experience. They also collect business intelligence and share it with marketing teams. And so Feroot has the ability to not only detect all of that stuff that is going on, it can set off an alarm so that you know what's going on, and it's almost can act as a firewall, if you will. It can actually block that stuff. And I highly recommend you look into Feroot, F-E-R-O-O-T, because we as the PCI Dream Team have been getting contacted by several other vendors with supposedly efficient solutions to solve this problem. But they all involve installing an agent of some sort on the actual server itself, the web server itself. The Feroot is a total pass-through, non-intrusive, and they've built the most intelligence into this stuff that I've seen before. It can even flag script that are executing that are potential OWASP vulnerabilities. And so I highly recommend you look into their solution. But I will also say, if you go to the PCI DSS version 4, and you for 6.4.3 and 11.6.1, there's several columns. One is the defined approach requirements, the defined approach testing procedures, and then there's a whole bunch of content in there under a column called purpose. And in there, they give you some hints and tips and clues on, essentially what to do or how to try to test for this stuff without having to invest in some third-party commercial utility. But I, for one, finally glad to see that the council, I've been sending them Hail Mary emails for quite some time and requesting that they do something about this, and they finally have. Although the last thing I will say about this is Coop is right. These requirements do not come into effect until 2025, but I would recommend start working on this stuff now, because a lot of the applications that are out there are pretty complicated, and they've got a lot of this stuff that's forced upon the developers to be included on the web pages that are from the marketing department, and they also get calling out these third-party sources and whatnot. And so finally, we're getting some visibility into this. So I suggest you start looking into this ASAP if this is an issue for you. I also want to point out that the PCI DSS, the council calls out payment pages only, and I submit that you really need something as well for payment redirection pages, because a lot of times there have been a lot of notable compromises that have occurred because of web browser sessions being redirected to a bogus website that's pretty much identical to the legitimate website. So anyway, this is one of my pet peeves. I'm glad to see some attention being given to this, and I'm glad you asked that question. That's a great question.
Well,
I think
there's
one thing I'll do
there's
is-
a follow-up, David, which are the pages where people store credit cards in their profile also covered by this? And of course they are. Anywhere, any page that a credit card can be stored whether it's to be tokenized, whatever. Yeah, that page also gets covered by 11.6.1. So yes, you need to worry about that.
One thing also, David said, we've got till 2025 until, version 4 is mandatory. And a lot of people said, oh, 2025 is so far away. I mean, a lot of places it takes 3 months to order and get new toner. So, PCI, all of these infrastructure, all these engineering things, they take time. They have to be tested, QA, approved. So 2025 really from an IT perspective in general, and from a PCI perspective specifically, is literally, just around the corner. So no one should be saying, it's so far off. It will come, very quickly, especially for companies that are not prepared. One of these, actually, Coop answered this question, but it's worth, just bringing it up to the general audience. Jonathan Rogers asked, if you're a company providing data center services hosting, are you automatically considered a service provider? Coop said, not necessarily if you're in a position to affect the security of cardholder data, even as just physical security, you are indeed. But, how could how could you be a service provider and not affected in some way?
What this goes to, Ben, is if you're running a data center and you're selling data center services, one of the questions all your salespeople need to ask any prospective customer is, do you process, store, or transmit cardholder data?
Yeah.
Because that brings the data center into scope at a minimum for physical security, if not for more stuff, because a lot of these data centers are also bringing in pipe and they're managing it, they're firewalling it on behalf of their customers. Some of them monitor it. I know that's the case at Rackspace for some of their services. And so anyone in that data center space needs to educate their salespeople, add it to the checklist, the form that you give them, whatever, but they need to be asking prospective customers and their regular customers, because a customer today may not be doing card data, but 6, 12, 18 months down the road, all of a sudden their business changes and they're all of a sudden processing payments and nobody knows that.
I mean, this is the question is, you're Joe's Deli and data center. You've got 1,000 racks and you say, hey,
hey, I buy sandwiches there.
You make it clear to your customers you're not PCI compliant, but nonetheless, their customers themselves are storing massive amounts of cardholder data. Could the card brand, could someone come back to Joe's data center and say, hey, you're non-compliant from a PCI perspective? It was my understanding always the answer is no.
Well, so that's an old chestnut. When I used to train the QSAs at the council, service providers and so on and so forth, it always cracks me up. And I used to teach it this way. There's an A service provider and a B service provider. A is the one that does a SAC-D, does a ROC, and in many cases will get a QSA to do it and really wants to be forthright, really wants to be compliant. Maybe they list themselves on Visa's CISP service provider website. Maybe they put it themselves on the MasterCard. They do all the right things. Then there's the B service provider. Unfortunately, we have a crap load more Bs than we do As. B service provider is doing something for a merchant or a bunch of merchants, doing something, storing something, transmitting something, doing something.
Yep.
And they don't have a SAC and they don't have a ROC, and merchants are yelling at them, are you compliant? And then a lot of times they're like, yeah, we're good. And then what happens is the merchant has a choice to make. You either continue to do business with them and keep forcing them or try to force them to do something, or you have your QSA have to interview those people every year. And I had merchants like that. I had one merchant that everybody here has stuck their credit card in their payment box. And this particular merchant was using Billy Joe's Deli and whatever you said it was. And these idiots refused to do anything. Wouldn't do a SAC, wouldn't do a rock. So every year I would have to travel to Billy Joe's Deli and whatever and question those people so that we could answer the questions on the merchant's rock. And so that's kind of the sad story of what really happens with this stuff. It's these service providers will hide, and heaven forbid there's a breach, because then it comes out. And then you find out that Billy Joe's Deli and Transaction Gateway was the cause for the breach, and they never were compliant, never listed anything. And
they make it eminently clear we are not.
Yeah, but you know what? Just making something eminently clear means you're violating most of the payment cards requirements. If you look at any of these contracts that start with the brands, go to the acquirers, and down to the merchants, they're all told they have to be compliant with PCI. So just because I tell you, I've watched Judge Judy a million times. Just because I put a sign in the parking lot that says I'm not responsible for anything that happens here does not necessarily mean I'm not responsible for anything that happens here. And so service providers can do that. And I've seen that shtick. I've testified in 3 cases where they did that shtick and they still got sued, because just saying we don't care and we're not compliant, you can't do that, because in the United States, you have to use what's called ordinary care. And that applies to PCI too. And so unfortunately, lawyers have a field day with that, and they end up segregating the money from those service providers that have been B service providers and choose to be B service providers and not report until they have to, or they're pushed, into a corner. It's just a fact of life. I wish it wasn't. I hate it, but it is what it is.
So in that same vein, I'll give you a little piece of education I got recently from, of all places, the National Credit Union Administration, NCUA, because I had a number of credit unions saying, we don't have to comply with this PCI DSS nonsense. It says nothing about financial institutions. And apparently they don't understand the legal system and the concept of contracts, because the contract very clearly states that, they'll comply with the card brand rules, and apparently that wasn't good enough. Well, the NCUA and the FDIC have apparently decided that while it's not called out in their regs, they are holding the financial institutions' feet to the fire over the fact that that is part of due care, as they consider it. And so that is how they're holding financial institutions to be PCI compliant. And so for all of you out there in the dealing with financial institutions, just ask them to talk to the regulator, because the regulator is going to tell them that, not only is it a contractual requirement because someone in your organization signed a contract with the card brands to offer a branded card, but we're going to call you on it if you're not doing it. And actually, if you think about it, in order for the financial institution to pass their exam, their regulatory exam, you need to have all those controls in place anyway. So
exactly,
just do it.
Yeah, it's like Nike. Just do it. I've always felt that way with PCI. I had some clients in the beginning when I left those first left that first QSA class up in Boston with Mike Don and went out to the world, and if they would have put the effort into doing the work versus trying to get out of it, they'd have been compliant and probably maybe even secure. And this is what always kills me, is that QSA spend more time having to argue a lot of times with clients as to, why can't you at least do this? Why can't you, and I think what I am really proudest of, just can speak for myself, is every one of these clients that I've been working with for 10, 11, 12 years, they've upped the ante every year. And that's great, because I always say to them, yeah, you're doing great, but guess what? We could still do better. There's more. It's an onion. We can add a layer, add another layer, add another layer. So yeah, I just do it.
We got tons of questions. Hopefully we can get to them. If we didn't get to your question, feel free to email us PCIDreamTeam@gmail, and we'll answer you there. Here's a good question, a fundamental question from Eben Thomas. How much of your PCI responsibility can you transfer to a third party like Recurly? Can all of your PCI responsibilities be transferred completely? I mean,
No.
yeah. That's I think Jeff, I'll
SAQA is the absolute
That's
bare
right.
minimum.
That's right.
Period.
Yeah, I answered that,
Because-
and I just basically said, if Recurly or whoever is doing literally everything for you, you'll still need to do a SAC-A to attest to that fact, because you can't just not attest. So, I mean, that's the answer. You got to do the SAC-A, period. And if you read the SAC-A,
what people miss is your organization signed the contract
that's right.
to accept payment cards for services
That's right.
rendered. And that's on you. Yes, you can outsource your website to AWS, and Amazon runs your sales, and you do nothing really other than collect the money
Right.
from those sales, but it's still on you, and you have to do that SAC-A.
And if you look at the SAC-A, this is a great trivia question. With PCI 4.0, it's a little different, but if you look at the SAC-A, it's the only place in PCI documentation where it mandates that all of your service providers must be PCI compliant and have to prove it. So that if you're filling out a SAC-A, then everybody like Recurly or whoever, I know he mentioned Recurly, they have to have a SAC-D or a ROC or something that shows that they're compliant. And if they don't, then that doesn't allow you to fill out that SAC-A, because you're violating that tenet. And that's the only place in PCI. People used to challenge me on it, and then they'd lose that challenge because they would dig through the documentation. It's the one place that says your service providers simply must be compliant. And what that means is, in other situations like what I was talking about, you could have a service provider that is a B service provider, won't do anything, and they're not compliant, but they're doing the one little thing for a merchant, and then the merchant's QSA talks to them, whatever. So that can be done. It's not great. Under 12.8, you should be fighting with that service provider. But SAC-A, like Jeff says, you signed a contract. If you're going to sign a SAC-A, then everybody that's doing it on your behalf, Recurly or whoever, they must be compliant, and they must prove that compliance with some type of attestation.
And that proof is an AOC, period.
They need that attestation.
I just dealt with someone a month ago.
Not an old TrustWave certificate.
Oh God.
TrustWave has deemed you compliant.
Yes. No, I had a third party say, well, we've got a SOC 2, see? And they gave me their SOC 2, and I said, yeah, this is not good enough. I need your attestation of compliance. Well, we don't do one. And I said, well, then here are your choices. I come through and do an assessment of you and the services you're providing my client, or you hire a QSA, could be me, and I'll come out there and do your assessment for you. But those are your only two options. Not having one is not an option. And so for all of you that are third parties out there, just do the assessment, please. Don't stop arguing with the QSAs and stop saying you don't know what's going on. Just do the damn assessment and get it done. We're all tired of it. It's been almost what now, 17 years, Coop?
Yes, it has.
Just,
Actually,
just get
it has
over
been.
and
Think
do
about
the
it.
damn work.
It was 2005-ish when it hit the street. So it's like
Yeah.
18 damn years now. Come on, guys. You
But
know?
from that responsibility thing, an attorney told me something fundamental is you could always outsource responsibility, but you can never outsource liability. And that's,
Yep.
people need to consider that is at the end of the day, you could have that level of liability could be, quite significant. So consider that you're not just outsourcing it, you could be increasing liability also. So.
Yeah,
Mentioned earlier,
absolutely.
Coop, real quick, some PCI trivia. How about digress for 20 seconds? PCI trivia. How many card brands are there
Now or in the beginning?
now?
Yeah.
Oh, everyone's going to tell you 5, but the answer is
6.
6. Yeah,
Right.
It's Union Pay. But
Yeah. Yes,
we'll
the
keep.
Chinese card brand.
Yeah, we they like to keep that quiet. But yeah, if it's on your QSA test, the answer is 5.
For
They
for those of us that dealt with Union Pay over in China, it was interesting. I had a large client there, and in China, they print the full pan on the receipt. And we asked them to stop doing that. And so they did, but for just that one merchant.
Yeah.
So they still print the full pan on the receipt. I'm not sure if France changed their law. France actually required that because that is the only legal record of a transaction in France under their law. And so receipts in France carried the full pan, which drove a lot of my clients who were doing business in France nuts because they had to securely store all that stuff, their copies of it.
So I was doing PCI work in India a while back, and I was working for the world's largest payment processor at the time. And the hotel I was staying in, I went to have lunch, and when they brought out, a little book for me to make a payment, they printed out the, merchant copy and the customer copy, and they actually put the full pan on both copies. And so I asked for the manager, and the manager came over, and I explained to him who I was and what I was doing in India. And I pointed that out to him, and he said, "You're going to have to talk to the bank of," and I'm not going to say the name, but I think you know where that's going. There's very few banks in India, and it's, they did a turnkey installation of this stuff into our hotel. So you'll have to talk to them. So anyway, I guess it still happens.
There's an interesting question here about Stripe. Did you answer it, Coop?
Yeah, I did. But I want to hit the one that I really want to get into. You did your rant on phones. I want to do the rant on encryption because this is very important. And somebody brought it up. Under 321, the encryption, one of the things that is going to happen as of March 31, 2025, all of that disk encryption is pretty much only going to be useful on a removable type drive. The old style of encrypting, like at a SAN level or at the LUN level and all that, we're no longer going to be able to accept that. So this is something that it's very important. Data at rest will have to be protected in a much more stringent manner than has been the case. We've always allowed encryption with key management, but things like TDE, like Oracle and SQL TDE, are not going to be acceptable anymore. And that's going to make a lot of people crazy because the problem with that type of encryption is it's not really true file level encryption in the sense that PCI 4.0 is calling out. So with that, okay, gentlemen, argue amongst yourselves.
Well, no, I mean, so if people are familiar with how a SAN works, you have bunches of disks spinning inside a cabinet and it stores data. And one of the big improvements, so to speak, within SAN storage years ago was when SANs got shipped out, they would base level encrypt all those drives so that when a drive failed, the vendor would not be able to read any of the data that was installed, nor could they recover it. And a lot of people were relying on that as meeting the encryption requirement for storing cardholder data. And no, that was never acceptable. You had to encrypt it at least the folder or file level in order to be acceptable. Because one of the big things that I always used to tell people about call recordings is put them in an encrypted folder and then restrict access to the fewest people that can get into it. Because a lot of the voice recording technologies couldn't deal with encrypting individual recordings. And so we did it that way to get around it. And as Coop is saying now, these column level encrypted databases are not going to meet the encryption requirement anymore of PCI. And the reason is because of the key management and the fact that once you have the key, you can decrypt the whole damn column in an instant. That's the whole problem in the process.
Yeah,
And
let's talk about the fact, because we're limited on time. So let's talk about the fact that Oracle states that their TDE is good for PCI version 4. I would argue it's not. And SQL is also saying, Microsoft SQL.
Same thing.
TDE. I would argue that those traditional TDE types of encryption are not meeting the spirit and the intent of that new requirement, 351 and 3511 and 12.
Yeah,
whatever the heck they are now. Those new requirements that are kicking in, come March 31st, 2025. As far as I'm concerned, those do not meet the spirit and the intent. And I think you have to go to things like Vormetric. I hate using vendor names, but I think you have to end up going to solutions like Vormetric, the Talus stuff, where it literally takes HSMs, keys, goes down to the file, column, table, the level that it has to go to.
This whole goes back to my comment about 4.0, Coop, about if you're a merchant, you shouldn't be storing this stuff anyway. There is no reason on earth you need to hang on to it.
Absolutely.
So if you are, you have until 2025
to get rid of it. That's what we've been saying. The thing is, one of my clients is a service provider. They're wonderful people, and they're also very, very secure folks. And so they're in this dilemma right now. They had a SAN. I believe it was I'm going to say the wrong one. I think it was a Pure Power. The thing is, the encryption was solid, and I was okay with it through the years because it did meet the spirit and the intent, but it will not now going forward. And so I am very proud of this organization for coming forward and talking to me about it now. And I think that we have to get away from TDE stuff, because TDE will not help you with SQL injection and some of these other things. I mean, TDE only does so much. And like you said, merchants, you need to get rid of this card data, period. This should only be affecting service providers where they're, doing issuing services, or they're doing transaction payment gateway type services. The people that have no choice but to hang on to the people that have to, like TokenX and some of these other outfits, tokenization and things like this. First Data, the Fiserv, the FISs of the world, the TSYS, the Globals. These are folks that will have to deal with this. But merchants, any of you on here that are merchants, for God's sakes, how many years has it been? We've been telling you, get rid of this crap. You do not need this card data. These CRM apps that you were using in 2003 and all of this crap, dump it on Salesforce, tokenize it all, and don't worry about it. Just stop storing card data, merchants, please.
I mean, what that is, with TDE also is that, this type of re-engineering is, March 2025 comes very, very quickly, and companies need to, start thinking now how we're going to do that. And that's, eye opener for a lot of
because
just don't store it anymore. You don't have to. There's a handful of companies that need to store cardholder data, but for the other 98%, you don't have to.
from experience, I can tell you, you don't toss Vormetric into an environment and install it overnight.
Yeah.
It does not work that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things is, companies confuse, getting a product installed with the product working, and the installation doesn't take that long, but any of these enterprise tools, take months to design, deploy, configure, and get working. I think, this maybe you have, one last question. I think this is a really good one. This is one from an anonymous. My client's arguing with me using a third-party COTS application. They and that why it's not in PCI scope. My argument is still be in scope. They have to provide the compliant AOC. And as you said, as Coop said, COTS or not, if it's involved in storing, transmitting, or processing cardholder data, it's in scope, period. And
That's
And it should have gone through the
COTS. Yeah. It's sort of got the get out of PCI free card, but that's clearly not the case.
And it should go through the new SSF stuff, the secure software framework. And if it hasn't, I don't care if it's COTS. I don't care if you bought it on a COT in an Army supply store. The bottom line is, the damn thing, if it's storing, processing, transmitting card data, it's in scope. And the software vendor should go through SSF so that people can buy it and know it's compliant.
The other thing that you run into is the DSS says nowhere that you have to use SSF validated software. And that's very true.
Right, exactly.
However, Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and American Express, all in their contracts, tell you must.
That's right.
So yes, the DSS doesn't call it out, but let me tell you, your card brands do.
And this is a good time to bring up the fact that the PCI Council, the SSC, they just develop the standards and train people about them, and they validate the reports that come in for various products like the SSF, used to be the old PCI DSS and this and that. They are not an enforcement arm. So I love it when people say, why doesn't PCI do something about this? Because they don't. The payment brands are the enforcers. The enforcement starts with the card brands down. And as Jeff said, every agreement they put out says, thou shalt use SSF payment apps now. Used to be PCI DSS with Visa, used to be PABP. But now all of the card brands say, you have to use apps that have gone through the secure software framework, period. So not hard. I don't care if it's COTS or Billy Joe wrote it or whatever. Now, if it's bespoke and it's only doing one little thing, a QSA can come in, assess it, and get you through your compliance. But I would be careful with that. If you're a service provider, especially if you're like a TPS, a Visa, a person that it's not going to work. They're going to want you to have it.
I've been involved with a number of organizations, and they're being told now that the secure software lifecycle standard is now going to get mandated by the card brands to assess bespoke software to make sure that it is properly developed and controlled and managed.
Drake Carr said Oracle says TDE is acceptable PCI version 4.
Yeah, Drake.
That's let them.
Let them fight that, Drake.
Yeah.
Drake's a good fella. Drake's a good guy. He's a Colorado guy too, and I used to work with Drake. Drake's a good guy, and that's a good point to make because Oracle is saying that. A lot of outfits are saying that because that's their bread and butter. So what do you expect them to do?
I think there's just one Christopher Bullen here. I'm not sure what he said in reference to, but it says it's called a shared responsibility for a reason. I think that's a really important point.
We all be in this together.
That's right. It's a big boat.
Anyone using a cloud service provider, they're all sharing the responsibility matrix, and they make it clear what they're doing and not doing. And a lot of people think, just because it's in the cloud, they do everything. And that's a wake up call.
I love the
but they come
people that
calling.
say, "Oh, I'm using AWS's firewall."
Right. So,
And so AWS developed your firewall rules then, okay? Well, no, we developed the firewall rules. Oh, so you do have skin in the game.
Well, also keep in mind that, in the cloud, depending upon what architecture model you're embracing, whether it's SaaS, IaaS, or PaaS, then the responsibilities will shift up and down. The shared responsibilities will shift up and down the OSI stack. So it's important to have that mapped out. And I've actually seen some of my clients actually will go to the trouble of mapping out the shared responsibilities for all those requirements that that apply. So it's a good idea to go through that exercise if you're in the cloud, and you have to understand how your architecture type impacts those responsibilities. Plus, those should be written into service level agreements and incident response plans, because the last thing you want to be doing when you're putting out a forest fire, a tree forest fire, AD forest fire, is you don't want to be sitting around a table having what I call the network family feud scenario, where they're all going, it's his fault, it's her fault.
yes. So, we're coming up. We're coming up on the hour. So we had 29 questions. I think we got maybe, half of those. So if you have any more, email them to a PCI Dream Team, and we'll try to, get through those that were not answered. Once again, thanks to everyone who joined. Thanks to Trusted for hosting. Reminder.
TrustedSec.
TrustedSec. Thank you. I've got.
Way to go, Ben.
Sorry, I did. Well, hopefully when they edit that, and remember, they're going to be kind enough to send out 3 copies of our book. I just checked on Amazon. There's only 10 copies left in stock.
Woo.
Whoa, really?
Please, make it, make them out of stock. Thanks for joining. We look forward to doing this TrustedSec webinar again. As it is, maybe the next one will make 2 hours. But once again, thanks everyone for joining. Thanks TrustedSec for hosting, and look forward to speaking with you again.
Woohoo.
Live long and prosper. Bye, folks.